Okay, so Rebecca has a lot of things to live up to. Not only is it based on a classic novel, the film adaptation by Alfred Hitchcock also won Best Picture in 1940. It's got some big high heels to fill, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking down the movie's story, its crazy ending, and the differences to the source material. There will be heavy spoilers here, so if you haven't had a chance to check out the film yet, then I highly recommend that you check out now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for videos like this every day, and please drop a thumbs up if you enjoy the breakdown. With that out of the way, welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy that's always at your Rebeccand Call. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so Rebecca primarily follows Lily James's character, who is only ever known as Mrs. De Winter. Whilst leaving a character's name out of a script is pretty lazy writing, it's actually been done for a specific reason, and that is to paint out the purpose of the character. Mrs. De Winter is pretty much viewed as a stand-in for Mr. De Winter's deceased wife Rebecca, and we see she tries her best to come to terms with this whilst also discovering what really happened to her. Mr. Maxim De Winter, played by Armie Hammer, is apparently grieving due to his wife's drowning the year before, and there's a large hole in his life that not only looms over him, but also his estate, known simply as Manderley. Throughout the introduction of the movie, we watch as Mr. and Mrs. are introduced to one another, and they fall in love. Due to the class system in England, Mrs. is pretty much viewed as an object, a staff member rather than a person, and thus when Maxim plucks her out of this, she's naturally swept off her feet. The first act of the film could be mistaken for a classic romance story, and we watch as the pair get to know each other, fall in love, and get married faster than you can say Viva Las Vegas. However, the dynamic quickly changes when Mrs. arrives at Manderley and finds that Rebecca's ghost very much still resides in the house. Now, though there's nothing supernatural about the events, the film does a good job of making you feel like there's a presence in the manor. Though this never truly manifests, even with its faults, I did find that the movie achieved its goal of making us feel like something else was afoot here. Afoot here. I can't believe I've said that. I've been watching far too many of these period pieces recently. Anyway, at Manderley resides Mrs. Danvers, played by Kristen Scott Thomas. Danvers is the head of the household, and we learn that she cared for Rebecca throughout pretty much her entire life. Because of this, she remains incredibly loyal to her, and even in death, very much feels like she must still serve her. This devotion makes her gain an instant dislike to Mrs., who she views as being a shallow replacement. Mrs. Danvers pretty much becomes a vessel for Rebecca's vengeful spirit, and by proxy, she torments Mrs. similar to how Rebecca tormented Maxim. Yes, I know, I'm calling her Mrs. I'm sorry. Now, Danvers does whatever she can to destroy Mr. and Mrs. relationship, but Mrs. fights on through it all. Now, this mirrors an earlier encounter with Mrs. Boss, in which she mocks their relationship and says that they aren't a good fit because of their social status. No one puts my hat on me. No one, I tell you. Now, throughout the film, we learn that Rebecca didn't die in an accident and that Maxim actually killed her. Rebecca was diagnosed with cancer of the uterus, and with only months left to live, she decided to enact a plan that would rob Maxim of feeling guilt-free over her passing. Rebecca was known for her beauty, and she didn't want to have a frail, dying woman being the last thing that people remembered her as. Thus, she pretended to be pregnant and provoked Maxim into killing her in the hopes that he would go to prison. Because the death looked like an accident, Maxim was exonerated of her death, but Rebecca still very much haunts him. Now, though most stories that follow this aesthetic would very much end with Mrs. getting chased through the mansion by Mr. with an axe, Rebecca is a lot more understanding of Maxim's predicament. The movie pretty much paints him out as someone who was mentally abused by his wife, and the constant torment that he faced very much made his life a living hell. Rebecca cheated on him often and threatened him with humiliation at several points. Because of the said class system and the legacy of Manderley, Maxim very much felt that if their relationship troubles were made public, that this would bring shame to his family name, and thus he kept it a secret. Maxim was very much forced to kill her in order to stop her not only taking away his pride, but also his home, name, and the legacy that his family had built. Maxim believed that Rebecca was pregnant with an illegitimate heir between Rebecca and her cousin Jack, that, because he wouldn't go public about, would mean that the home would be passed over to someone else that wasn't a true De Winter. Now, whilst this wasn't true, it was enough to make Maxim kill her, which was her ultimate endgame. Maxim faked the drowning and sunk the boat she was in, pushing it out to sea in order to cover up the crime. A woman's body later washed up on the shore, and Maxim identified her as Rebecca, even though this was just a Jane Doe. However, the boat is soon discovered along with Rebecca's corpse, and due to the punctures in the hull, it makes it clear that her death was no accident. After a letter is discovered summoning Jack, all things point towards Maxim, and he's arrested. Maxim becomes the prime suspect in her death, and the movie takes a sharp turn for the finale. Now luckily for Maxim, Rebecca's tumor is discovered, and due to her being clearly short on time, suicide is instead listed as the cause of her death, which exonerates Maxim. However, Danvers doesn't want to allow Maxim to win in the end, and because of her devotion to Rebecca, she burns down Manderley in order to destroy his legacy before she throws herself into the sea. Honestly, it feels like a completely weird ending, and one that's a bit messy until you look at the true meaning behind it. Now, as mentioned earlier, Danvers is pretty much the personification of Rebecca, and metaphorically, this is very much her destroying the manor in the end. Rebecca wanted nothing more than to tear Maxim's life apart, and thus Danvers carrying this out symbolically shows that she achieved her goal in the end. However, it shouldn't really be classed as a victory, and Danvers tossing herself into the sea can also be seen as the last shred of Rebecca's presence, dying along with her. This is why we cut almost immediately to both Mr. and Mrs. finally sharing some real happiness together in a new home. Not only are they free of the manor, which Rebecca was so tightly bound to, but they're also free of Rebecca herself. Danvers tells Mrs. De Winter that she will never know happiness, and personally I think it's the parting words of the bitter Rebecca, who wanted nothing more than to ruin Maxim's life, but failed in doing so. Mrs. definitely says that she will find happiness, and it's very much seen as a victory for the character. Now throughout, Danvers constantly tried to compare Mrs. to Rebecca, and often commented on how she wasn't as beautiful as she was. She even made her dress up as her in order to embarrass her, and tried to show that she simply couldn't live up to her. However, that is where Mrs. succeeded, and because she was such an opposite to Rebecca, she was actually a better fit for Maxim. Maxim wanted nothing more than a woman who wasn't cruel to him, genuinely loved him, and wouldn't try to emotionally abuse him. This is why Mrs. is so perfect for him, and why she shouldn't have been so upset about being compared to Rebecca. In the end, Mr. and Mrs. have escaped from everything that Rebecca held over them, and they can now move in a new direction without her ghost hanging over them. Now this is a sort of happy ending if my interpretation is correct, and it's actually why the original film differed so much. Due to laws at the time known as the Hays Code, filmmakers were unable to portray a woman's death in a positive light. It was also classed as highly immoral to show people getting away with murder, and thus Maxim could not be seen getting away unpunished. In the original, Rebecca's death is accidental, and she dies from hitting her head during a fall. There are other differences, such as Favell being called for by Maxim in order to look over the letter, which does add some weight towards his innocence. The finale also ends with Mrs. Danvers going to Rebecca's room as the mansion burns around her, and she dies in the foundations, symbolically taking Rebecca with her too. Now both endings are very much seen as an exorcism, and they should be classed as a send-off to Rebecca, rather than the way that they're initially portrayed with her and Danvers winning. Either way, that wraps up the movie, and before we get into the review, I just want to let you know we're giving away 3 copies of the Marvel Phase 1 box set, and all you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below. The winner is going to be chosen at random on the 30th of October, so make sure you get involved. Now what were my thoughts on the film? Well, though it's getting slammed pretty badly by the critics, I don't think it's a complete train crash. Yeah, don't throw yourself off a cliff, director, please, I'm begging you. Much like Mrs. and Rebecca herself, the movie is being compared to the original, and that's something that's very difficult to live up to. Now, if you go in with either the novel or the 1940 film looming over your head, much like Danvers, you're not going to see this as matching up. The chemistry isn't really there between the De Winters, and at times it plods along, not really advancing the plot. However, when viewed on its own, I don't think it's that bad, and for a midweek movie on Netflix, it's absolutely fine. It's fine, isn't it? Now I think a lot of people will probably enjoy this to a certain extent, and though it's not a new classic, if this is your first time experiencing the story, you'll probably find some stuff to like here. Rebecca was fine and gets a 6 out of 10, and we'll have a way with all that nonsense about it being a complete piece of crap. Anyway, now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts on the film, so make sure you comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop a thumbs up, and make sure you check out our breakdown on the third day, which is going to be linked at the end. We go over the weird season and its ending, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. If you want to support the channel and get to see content early, then please consider clicking the join button below. You can also come chat to us on our Discord server, linked in the description, or at Heavy Spoilers on Twitter. Thanks for making it until the end of the video. You've been the best. I've been Paul. I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.